They tell you that the immaterium is a sea, a chaotic ocean that we simply sail across. That is a lie told to comfort the ignorant. The warp is not an ocean, it is a stomach, and we are the indigestible gristle caught in its throat. My chronometer claims I have been recording this log for 6 standard months. The bone density scans of the crew suggest we have been adrift for 40 years. The star charts, when we briefly glimpsed real space before the shutters slammed down, suggested something far worse, that the civilization we fought to protect has been dust for 3 millennia. I am Navigator Primus Valerius Thorn, bound to the cruiser Bastion of Martyrs, and I am documenting our damnation not for posterity, but because if I stop speaking, the whispering in the walls becomes too loud to ignore. The Bastion was a magnificent beast of the Imperial Navy, 4 kilometers of Gothic arches and adamantium armor, a flying cathedral designed to bring the Emperor's wrath to the rebellious fringes of the Calixis sector. We carried 15,000 souls, a regiment of drop troops, and enough ordnance to crack a small moon. Captain Augustus Cale commanded her. Cale was a man of marble and iron, an officer who believed that logistics and faith were the same discipline. He didn't just demand loyalty, he demanded spiritual perfection. To him, a smudge on a uniform was a stain on the soul. We feared him more than we feared the void, which is exactly how a captain keeps a ship alive. Or so we thought. Our translation into the warp was textbook. The Geller field, that bubble of reality that keeps the demons out, ignited with a reassuring thrum. The plasma drives pushed us through the membrane of reality, and we were submerged. For the first week, it was a milk run. I sat in my navigator's sanctum, a crystalline blister isolated from the rest of the bridge, staring into the swirling madness with my third eye. The warp currents were strong but predictable, like trade winds made of liquid hate. I steered us through the shoals of unreality, guiding the massive vessel by the distant golden beacon of the Astronomicon. It was routine. It was boring. It was the calm before the guillotine drops. The change didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a silence. On the 4th day, the screaming of the warp, the usual background psychic static of a billion nightmares, just stopped. The colors outside my blister, usually a kaleidoscope of bruising purples and sickly greens, bleached into a flat, sterile gray. It was the color of a dead eye. I have navigated the Empyrean for 60 years. I have seen storms that eat fleets and eddies that trap ships in time loops. I have never seen the warp go still. It felt as if the ocean had suddenly turned into solid glass. I immediately hailed the command throne. Captain Cale, we have a problem. The currents, they vanished. The flow is dead. Cale didn't look up from his slate. The engines are functioning, Navigator. Keep your course. You don't understand, sir, I pressed, fighting the tremor in my hands. There is no course. The medium we travel through has solidified. It's like the physics of this dimension have been rewritten around us. We are being corralled. He finally looked at me via the hololith, his eyes cold and hard. The Emperor provides the path, Thorn. If the water is still, we row harder. Do not let me hear panic in your voice again. I wanted to scream at him that faith doesn't fix hyperdimensional fluid dynamics, but I held my tongue. I tried to compensate. I tried to force the Bastion through the gray stagnation. That was my mistake. The moment I pushed the engines to flank speed, the trap sprung. It wasn't a storm. It was a riptide of impossible force. The gray stillness shattered, replaced instantly by a geometric nightmare of fractals and screaming light. The ship didn't just lurch, it twisted. I felt the hull groan, not vibrating with metal stress, but crying out like a living thing in pain. The gravity plating failed, then reversed, then stabilized at triple weight, pinning the bridge crew to the deck before releasing them. "Hard to port!" Kale bellowed, pulled from his throne but still clutching his command rod. "Stabilizers to maximum! I have no control!" I shouted back, my mind burning as I tried to interpret the data flooding my third eye. "The Astronomicon is gone, Captain. The light is gone." That was the moment the true horror set in. The Astronomicon is the lighthouse of the galaxy, the psychic beam generated by the Emperor himself. It is the only fixed point in the chaos. To lose it means you are not just off course, you are off the map of existence. The ship was dragged sideways, pulled by a gravity well that shouldn't exist in the warp. We were tumbling down a ravine in the fabric of reality. I saw the Geller field flicker. It was a microsecond failure, barely a blink, but in the warp, a blink is enough. Shadows detached themselves from the corners of the bridge. The air temperature dropped 50 degrees in a heartbeat, freezing the breath in our lungs. A servitor near the tactical station suddenly began to weep oil, its mechanical voice reciting nursery rhymes in a language that sounded like breaking bones. Kale shot it through the head without hesitation, the bolter round exploding the cyborg's skull. "Report!" Kale roared, stepping over the smoking wreckage of the servitor. "We have translated to somewhere else," I gasped, blood trickling from my nose. The psychic feedback was hammering against my skull. "The star patterns are wrong. The warp geometry is non-Euclidean. I can't find a reference point. Captain, we are blind." The bridge fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the air recyclers and the distant, wet thudding of the hull settling. We were alive. The Geller field had restabilized. But outside the viewports, the warp wasn't swirling anymore, it was watching. I could feel it. A heavy, oppressive attention, like a predator leaning close to the glass of an aquarium. Kyle adjusted his uniform, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. He looked at the terrified faces of his crew, men and women who knew that lost in the warp was a death sentence worse than execution. "Navigator Thorne," Kale said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Plot a search pattern. We will find a stable current." "Captain," I whispered, "there are no currents here. There is no north. There is no up. We are adrift in the deep dark." "Then we will drift with purpose," Kale declared, turning his back on the void. "Double the prayer shifts, maintenance crews to the Geller generators. If the warp wants to test us, let it break its teeth on our faith." He dismissed us. He acted as if this were a minor logistical error. But as I retreated to my blister, I saw his hand trembling. He knew. We all knew. We hadn't just lost our way. We had been taken. And as I looked out into the impossible colors of the void, I saw the first of the changes. The stars I tried to chart weren't stars at all. They were eyes. Thousands of them blinking in unison, waiting for the Geller field to fail again. Time didn't just break, it shattered into jagged, cutting shards. In real space, time is a river. It flows in one direction, carrying everyone along at the same speed. Here, in this silent gray hell, time became a swamp. It pooled, it stagnated, it flowed backward. My personal chronometer insisted that only 2 weeks had passed since the translation event. The ship's main logic engine, a machine spirit the size of a hab block, claimed we had been adrift for 6 months. But the quartermaster reported that our food supplies stocked for a 5-year crusade were nearly depleted. How do you reconcile that? You don't. You simply watch your fingernails grow an inch in an hour and pray your heart doesn't decide to beat a lifetime's worth of rhythms in a single minute. The first casualties weren't from violence, but from temporal dysmorphia. On Deck 9, a squad of voidsmen went for a routine patrol of the lower gunnery bays. They radioed in every 15 minutes, standard procedure. From the bridge's perspective, they were gone for an hour. When they returned, they were old men. Their uniforms were rags, their weapons rusted to their hands. They claimed they had been wandering the corridors for 30 years. trapped in a loop of hallway that never ended, surviving on condensation and rats. They didn't recognize Captain Kale. They didn't even recognize the Imperium. They were weeping, senile wrecks. Kale ordered them airlocked. He called it mercy, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of their suffering, he was afraid of their truth. The ship itself began to reject Euclidean geometry. I would leave my navigation sanctum to head for the officer's mess, a walk that should take 5 minutes. I would walk for what felt like hours, passing the same bulkhead, the same flickering lumen strip, the same stain on the deck plating, over and over again. Then with a sudden lurch of nausea, I would arrive. But the mess hall would be on the wrong side of the corridor, or the ceiling would be on the floor. The architecture was becoming fluid. Doors opened into solid walls. Stairwells led back to the top of the stairs. The Bastion of Martyrs was no longer a vessel, it was a labyrinth designed by a lunatic architect. I spent my days, a meaningless term now, locked in my blister, staring into the abyss, trying to find a pattern in the static. Captain Kale demanded updates every 4 hours. I attended these briefings via Voxcaster, refusing to physically go to the bridge unless necessary. I didn't trust the corridors. Kale's voice had changed. It wasn't just authoritative anymore, it was brittle, manic. He had started broadcasting sermons across the ship's intercom 24 hours a day. Faith is the anchor, his voice would crackle, distorted by the temporal static. The Emperor watches the vigilant. Report all anomalies. Do not succumb to the lies of your eyes. But the crew was succumbing. How could they not? I watched a maintenance tech drive a hydrospanner into his own eye because he claimed he could see his own death standing behind him in every reflection. And the worst part, when the medics arrived, there was a shadow standing there, a dark smear on the wall that hadn't been there before. The shadow didn't move, but it had teeth. It was around the 40th day, according to the wall clocks that spun wildly, that I noticed the pattern in the warp. The gray stillness outside wasn't empty. It was reacting. When the crew felt fear, which was always, the fog outside would darken, swirling into shapes that looked like grasping hands. When the captain raged, the warp would boil red. The environment wasn't just trapping us, it was feeding on our psychic emanations. It was a mirror. I hailed the bridge. "Captain, I have a theory," I said, my voice rasping from dehydration. The water recyclers were tasting of sulfur and old blood lately. "Is it a course, Thorn?" Kyle demanded. He sounded breathless, as if he had been running. "No, sir. It's an observation. The warp is responding to our collective emotional state. The more we panic, the deeper we sink. The ship's Geller field is holding back the physical demons, but it can't stop the psychic resonance. We are terraforming this pocket of unreality with our own nightmares." "Then we must purge the fear," Kyle stated, as if discussing a clogged air filter. "We will double the floggings. Discipline enforces calm. If the men are too afraid of me to fear the warp, the waters will clear." "That's not how it works, Captain. You can't beat someone into calmness." "We need to shut down higher brain functions, sedate the crew, put them into stasis. If we stop dreaming, the warp might lose interest." "And leave the ship undefended?" Kyle roared. "Heresy, Thorn. Absolute heresy. We will march through this valley. The Emperor protects." He cut the link. I slammed my fist into the console, cracking the screen. He was insane. A functional, high-functioning maniac who was going to get us all killed. I turned back to the viewport, trembling with rage. I looked out into the swirling gray mist, seeking, I don't know what, a sign, a hope. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, another temporal echo. Far in the distance, through the soupy haze of the Empyrean, a shape was coalescing. It was vast, dark, and jagged. I adjusted the magnification of my transept lenses, my third eye aching with the effort of piercing the veil. The shape sharpened. It was a ship. My heart hammered against my ribs. A rescue? Another lost soul? I manipulated the sensors, trying to get a hull profile. The cogitator's whirred and sparked, spitting out data that made no sense. The silhouette was familiar, too familiar. The high-arched spinal cathedral, the triple-engine array, the armored prow shaped like a clenched fist. It was a Dictator-class cruiser. It was 4 kilometers long. It was the bastion of martyrs. I froze. I looked at the identification codes flushing across my screen. They were our codes. The ship out there wasn't just a similar class, it was us. But it looked wrong. It was twisted, corrupted. Where our hull was pristine adamantium, this reflection was rusted and pitted, leaking pus-colored light into the void. Its gun batteries weren't pointing out. They were swiveling wildly, aiming at nothing. I realized then that my theory about the mirror was more literal than I had dared to imagine. The warp hadn't just been watching us, it had been learning us. It had taken our fear, our despair, our crumbling sanity, and it had built a monument to it. The intercom crackled to life, but it wasn't the captain this time. It was a scream, a raw, wet sound that lasted for 10 seconds before being cut off. Then the ship shook, not a turbulence shake, but an impact. We had been hit. "Bridge, report," I yelled. "Contact!" The tactical officer's voice was high and thin. "Unknown vessel, it just materialized off the port bow. It... Throne of Terra, it looks like us, it's firing boarding torpedoes." I looked out the blister. The dark reflection was closing in, moving with a predator's grace that a starship shouldn't possess. It wasn't firing lasers or plasma. It was launching jagged, rusty pods that trailed smoke that looked like screaming faces. They weren't trying to destroy us. They were trying to merge with us. The warp doesn't just want to kill you, it wants to be you. And as the first boarding pod slammed into our hull, shaking the bastion to its keel, I knew that the monsters coming out of it wouldn't be daemons. They would be the things we had been hiding in the dark corners of our own minds, given flesh and given weapons. The impact didn't feel like a collision. It felt like a violation. When the boarding torpedoes from the phantom ship struck us, the bastion of martyrs didn't just shudder. It gagged. The sound of tearing metal screamed through the superstructure, a screech so high-pitched it shattered the glass of my hydration terminal. But beneath the screeching metal was a wetter, sickening sound, like a knife slicing through gristle. The hull wasn't just being breached, it was being infected. Intruders on decks 12 through 15. The Vox network was a cacophony of panic. "They're... Emperor, save us! They're inside the bulkheads! They're coming out of the walls!" I remained sealed in my crystalline blister, my hands flying across the sensor arrays. I was a coward, perhaps, or simply the only man who understood that a last pistol does not stop a nightmare. I diverted power to the internal pickcasters, trying to get a visual on the invaders. The screens flickered with static, spitting out images in bursts of grayscale horror. What I saw made my bile rise. The boarders were not demons in the traditional sense. They had no horns, no cloven hooves, no wings of fire. They wore the uniforms of the Imperial Navy. They wore our uniforms. I watched a grainy feed from a junction on deck 12. A squad of our armsmen had taken cover behind a crate, firing wildly down the corridor. Emerging from the smoke were figures that moved with a shambling, broken puppetry. I zoomed in. The leader of the boarding party was a twisted reflection of Sergeant Harkin, the very man currently commanding the defense. But this Phantom Harkin was a ruin. His skin was pale and translucent, stretching too tight over his skull. His eyes were sewn shut with rusty wire, yet he fired his shotgun with preternatural accuracy. Behind him came others, crewmen I recognized, men and women I had eaten with, debated with. But these versions of them were bloated with decay or withered into husks, screaming silent screams as they advanced. They were the us that had given up. They were the us that had died in the dark. "Captain!" I screamed into the comms. "Do not let them close to the melee. They are psychological weapons. They are using our faces." Kyle's voice cut through the static, sounding terrifyingly exhilarated. "Let them come. If they wear our faces, we will carve them off. Armsmen, fix bayonets, purge the unclean. Show them that the bastion does not break." I watched on the monitors as the two waves clashed. It was a massacre of identity. I saw a young ensign hesitate as he raised his blade against a monster that wore his mother's face, or perhaps his own face, aged 40 years in hell. In that moment of hesitation, the creature tore his throat out with teeth that looked like jagged shards of glass. The Phantom crew didn't fight with strategy. They fought with the weight of inevitability. They absorbed La's fire without flinching, their bodies puffing out clouds of dust and rot instead of blood. But the physical battle was only the surface of the horror. The ships themselves were merging. The Bastion and its phantom twin were occupying the same space, superimposed over one another. The architecture began to bleed. In my blister, the floor plating dissolved into a mist, revealing a rusted, dripping grating beneath it, the floor of the other ship. I looked up and saw not the armored ceiling of my sanctum, but a vaulted cathedral arch made of bone-infused machinery. The reality of the Phantom ship was overriding ours. It was more real because it was born of the warp, and we were in the warp's domain. "Thorn!" Kale's voice was ragged now. "Report. The engineering deck is reporting structural overlap. The drive core it's beating. It has a heartbeat." "The ships are fusing, Captain," I cried, backing away as my console began to drip a thick black ichor. "We are becoming the reflection. You have to separate us. Fire the maneuvering thrusters. Break the lock." "We cannot," Kale roared. "They have welded to the hull. We are one vessel now." "Then we are dead," I whispered. "No." Kale sounded deranged. "If the limb is gangrenous, you cut it off. Computer, isolate decks 12 to 20, override safety protocols." I froze. "Captain, there are 3,000 loyal crewmen on those decks. They are holding the line." "They are compromised," Kale stated, his voice devoid of humanity. "They are fighting ghosts. They are already dead. Vent the atmosphere. Open the bulkheads to the void." "You can't!" I shouted. "That's murder! That is command!" I watched the tactical plot in horror as the airlocks on the lower decks cycled open. There was no sound in the vacuum, but the sensors registered the sudden, violent drop in pressure. 3,000 dots of light, the life signs of our crew, blinked out in seconds. The invaders, the Phantom crew, were unaffected. They didn't need air. But our men, the brave souls holding the line against their own nightmares, were sucked out into the screaming gray abyss of the warp. For a moment, the invasion slowed. The vacuum had created a barrier. But Kale's act of fratricide had fed the warp exactly what it wanted. Despair. Betrayal. The black ichor on my console bubbled and hissed. The walls of my navigation blister groaned. I realized with a jolt of ice-cold terror that I wasn't alone anymore. The isolation of my sanctum had been breached not by a torpedo, but by the merging of realities. A door that had never existed before appeared in the back wall of my blister. It was made of dark, heavy wood, banded with iron, radiating a cold that made my breath frost in the air. I knew that door. It was the door to my childhood home on Terra, a home that had burned down a century ago. The doorknob turned. I drew my last pistol, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. "Stay back," I warned the door. "I am an Imperial navigator. My soul is bound to..." The throne. The door creaked open. Standing there was not a monster. It was not a zombie. It was a man in a pristine navigator's uniform, his third eye bandaged with silk, his posture elegant and proud. It was me, or rather, it was the version of me that Kale wanted me to be. The perfect officer, the one who didn't doubt. "Valerius," the figure said, and its voice was my voice, but smoother, stripped of all the fear and doubt I had carried for 60 years. "Put the gun down. You look exhausted. The captain is right, you know. Pain is just weakness leaving the soul. Why are you fighting the inevitable?" "You aren't real," I spat, backing up until my spine hit the curved glass of the viewport. "I'm the only thing that is real." The other Valerius smiled, and his teeth were perfect, too perfect. "I am the Valerius who survives. Look at you, a trembling old man trapped in a glass ball. Join us. The bastion is evolving. We are becoming eternal." He took a step forward. Behind him, through the open door, I saw the corridor of the phantom ship. It was lined with bodies, not dead but fused into the walls, their faces ecstatic, their mouths open in a choir of silent worship. "Get out of my head!" I screamed, and I fired. The last bolt took the other Valerius in the chest. He didn't scream. He didn't bleed. He simply looked down at the smoking hole in his uniform with mild disappointment. "That was rude," he said. "We have so much work to do. The captain is waiting for us on the bridge, the real bridge." He began to walk toward me, and as he did, the shadows in the room elongated, reaching for my ankles. The pistol was useless. My science was useless. I did the only thing I had left. I closed my physical eyes, ripped the bandana from my forehead, and opened my third eye, the warp eye. I looked directly at him with the gaze that sees the soul, and I screamed. To look upon the warp with the naked eye is madness. To look upon it with the navigator's eye is truth. And truth, I discovered in that screaming split second, is a fire that burns everything it touches. When I opened my third eye, the perfect Valerius did not fight back. He did not fire a weapon or chant a hex. He simply unraveled. The illusion of his pristine uniform, his calm demeanor, his unmarred skin, it all sloughed away like wet paper. Beneath the lie, I saw what the warp had actually constructed. He was a hollow effigy made of gray rot and solidified regret. I saw the worms of self-doubt writhing where his heart should have been. I saw the dust of every cowardice I had ever committed compacted into the shape of bones. He opened his mouth to scream, but only moths flew out, swarming into the air before turning to ash. With a sound like a cracking whip, the air pressure in the blister equalized. The doppelganger vanished. I was alone again, kneeling on the deck, blood streaming from my nose and ears. My physical eyes were blinded by the backlash, leaving me to see the world only through the psychic lens of my third eye. The world was no longer colors and shapes, it was currents and souls. And the soul of the bastion of martyrs was screaming. I knew I had to reach the bridge. Captain Kyle was the anchor. His will, his ironclad, suffocating demand for order was the gravity well holding this nightmare together. If the ship was a body, he was the tumor in the brain. I stumbled out of my sanctum. The blast door, which should have been sealed, was hanging off its hinges, melted not by heat but by age. The corridor beyond was unrecognizable. The steel bulkheads had softened. They pulsed with a rhythmic biological heat. The deck plating felt spongy under my boots, like I was walking on the tongue of a leviathan. "Navigator." The voice bubbled up from the wall. I turned my head, my warp sight perceiving a cluster of dim, fading lights. Souls trapped in the matter. Embedded in the bulkhead was Ensign Davin. He wasn't simply stuck, he was integrated. His torso merged seamlessly with a conduit pipe. His skin stretched and fused into the metal. His eyes were wide, rolling in panic, but his jaw was slack. "Kill me," Davin whispered, a bubble of bloody oil bursting from his lips. The ship. It's eating us. It's digesting our memories. I raised my last pistol. My hand shook. To grant him mercy was to waste ammunition I might need. To leave him was a cruelty beyond measure. I looked at his soul, a flickering candle in a hurricane. The Emperor protects, I lied. I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like a thunderclap in the fleshy corridor. Davin's light went out. I walked on. I walked through a ship that was remembering its own history and getting it wrong. I passed the mess hall where the ghosts of the crew sat at tables made of bone eating food that looked like gray sludge. They didn't look up. They were stuck in a loop of the last meal they ever ate. I passed the chapel of St. Drusus. The statues of the saints were weeping real tears, flooding the floor with salt water that smelled of the ocean of Terra, an ocean none of us had ever seen. The further I went toward the bridge, the thinner reality became. The phantom ship, the dark reflection, wasn't just overlapping us anymore, it was replacing us. The lighting shifted from the emergency red of the bastion to a sickly, sour yellow. Gravity tilted. I had to crawl up a corridor that had become a vertical shaft. I found no resistance. There were no more boarding parties. Why would they fight? They had won. The crew was gone, either blown out into the void by Kale's madness or absorbed into the architecture. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wet thumping of the ship's heart, which sounded suspiciously like the cycling of the plasma drives. I reached the heavy blast doors of the Strategium. They were etched with high Gothic script, prayers of warding that were now blistering and peeling away. The doors were slightly ajar. I pushed through. The bridge of a dictator-class cruiser is usually a hive of activity, a pit of cogitators, servitors, and officers. Now it was a tomb. The crew pits were filled with a thick, translucent fog. The consoles were dead. The servitors were slumped in their harnesses, their cables severed. But the command throne was occupied. Captain Augustus Coyle sat high above the deck, but he wasn't sitting on the throne, he was part of it. The neural interface cables that usually connected to the captain's data slate had bypassed the machinery and burrowed directly into his skull. His uniform had fused with the leather of the chair. His legs ended in a mass of wires and piping that disappeared into the floor. He was looking out the main viewport. The blast shutters were open. Outside the warp was a swirling vortex of faces, millions of them screaming in silence. "Captain," I croaked. Kyle turned his head. The movement was stiff, mechanical. Half of his face was pristine, the handsome, rugged visage of the hero of the Calixis sector. The other half was stripped to the muscle, the eye missing, replaced by a glowing red optic lens that whirred as it focused on me. "Navigator Thorne," Kale said. His voice was amplified, coming from every Vox speaker on the bridge simultaneously. "You are late for your shift. We are approaching the Cadian Gate. Look, can you not see the light of the Emperor?" He gestured to the viewport with a hand that had fused fingers. "There is no light, Captain," I said, stepping over the corpse of the helmsman. "There is only the abyss. You killed the crew. You merged us with the shadow." "I saved them!" Kyle roared, and the ship shook with his anger. "I brought order to the chaos. Look at them. They are at their stations. They are eternal." He waved his hand at the empty crew pits. In his madness, he saw a full crew. In my warp sight, I saw the truth. The pits were filled with shadows. The phantom crew from the other ship. They were standing at the stations pantomiming the actions of a loyal crew. They were the ones flying the ship now. Kyle was commanding an army of ghosts. "The ship is dead, Augustus," I said, using his first name. A breach of protocol so severe it felt like a slap. "We are dead. This is hell. We are just waiting for the fire to go out." Kyle looked at me, confusion warring with the fanaticism in his remaining human eye. "Dead? No. The bastion endures. I have forged a new covenant. The warp offered me a choice, Valerius, to drift forever lost and weak, or to become the storm. I chose the storm. He leaned forward, the cables in his head pulsing with dark light. We are not going to Cadia anymore, Kyle whispered, a conspiratorial madness in his tone. We are going home, but not to Terra. We are going to the place where all maps end, and you will guide us. I will not, I said, raising my pistol. Kyle laughed. It was a sound like grinding gears. You think you have a choice? You think that gun matters? You are part of the ship, Valerius. Your blister, your eyes, your soul. You belong to me. He pressed a button on the arm of his throne. Pain. Absolute white-hot, blinding pain. It erupted not from my body, but from the base of my skull. My spinal implants, the navigator interface that allowed me to commune with the ship, flared to life. Kyle had overridden the safeties. He wasn't asking me to navigate, he was forcing the connection. I dropped the pistol. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. I could feel the machine spirit of the Bastion flooding into my mind. But it wasn't the machine spirit I knew. It was a feral, starving thing. It wanted to feed. It wanted to hunt. Navigate, Kale commanded, his voice booming like the voice of a god. Plot the course. Take us to the center of the scream. My third eye was forced open. The shutters of my mind were torn off. I was no longer Valerius Thorn. I was the sensory organ of a predator the size of a city. I saw the currents of the warp not as hazards, but as prey. I saw the route Kale wanted. It didn't lead out. It led down. Deeper than any ship had ever gone. Into the rift of Hecate, a place where even demons fear to tread. No! I screamed, fighting the intrusion with every ounce of psychic will I had left. I won't let you. You have no will, Kale countered. I am the captain. I am the will. He was too strong. He had the ship, the ghosts, and the madness on his side. I was being crushed. I could feel my identity dissolving, ready to become just another component in his biomechanical nightmare. But then, I remembered the Phantom Valerius. I remembered the hollowness I had seen inside him, the fear. Kale was the same. He wasn't strong. He was terrified. He had merged with the ship because he was too afraid to be just a man. He had surrounded himself with ghosts because he couldn't face the silence. You're afraid, I gasped, the blood dripping from my nose onto the deck plating. Silence, Kyle shrieked. You're afraid, that the Emperor isn't watching, I forced the words out. That's why you scream so loud. You're trying to get his attention, but he can't hear you here, Augustus. No one can. Kale froze. The machinery whirring in his head stuttered. For a microsecond, the human eye widened, and I saw the little boy lost in the dark. That microsecond was all I needed. I didn't push against him. I didn't try to block the connection. I did the opposite. I pulled. I opened the floodgates of my mind and I pulled the entirety of the warp storm into the link between us. I became a lightning rod for the unreality outside. I didn't try to filter it. I channeled the raw, undiluted chaos of the Imperian straight through my neural interface and fired it directly into the captain's throne. If you want the storm, I screamed, then take it! I channeled the scream of a billion damned souls into the mind of a single man. When the raw, unfiltered chaos of the warp hit Captain Kale, he didn't explode. Physics has no jurisdiction in a duel of souls. Instead, he unfolded. The biomechanical fusion of man and throne began to weep light, a blinding prismatic radiance that burned the shadows out of the corners of the bridge. Kale threw his head back, his mouth opening wider than a human jaw should allow, and the sound that came out wasn't a command. It was the sound of a structural failure on a cosmic scale. I see it, Kale shrieked. his voice harmonizing with the grinding metal of the ship. "I see the throne. It's empty. The golden throne is empty." Whether that was a truth revealed by the warp or a lie spun by his broken mind, I will never know. But the realization shattered him. The iron will that held the bastion of martyrs together in the pocket reality snapped. The captain dissolved. His flesh, his uniform and the cables fused to his skull turned into black ash, sucked instantly into the ventilation systems. With the anchor gone, the bastion was no longer a fixed point in hell. The localized reality collapsed. The sensation was not like movement, it was like being birthed. The pressure in the bridge spiked, popping the eardrums of every phantom crew member standing at the stations. The ghosts flickered and vanished, their purpose expended. I was thrown across the deck, sliding through the slime and debris as the ship bucked violently. The view outside the shutters shifted from the swirling gray faces of the warp to a sudden, blinding tapestry of hard, cold stars. Real space. The transition was too fast. The Geller field generators, already pushed past their limits, detonated deep in the bowels of the ship. I felt the shockwave through the deck plating. Then gravity failed. I floated in the center of the bridge, surrounded by the floating ash of Augustus Kale, watching the stars spin dizzyingly through the viewport. I tried to laugh, to cry, to pray, but my mind was a burned-out husk. I closed my eyes and the darkness took me. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the hum of a ventilation unit that sounded aggressively, beautifully normal. I was lying on a crisp white cot. My arms were restrained. Standing over me was a man in a crimson greatcoat, his face obscured by a rebreather mask, the rosette of the Holy Inquisition pinned to his chest. A servitor hovered behind him, a quill scrawl auto-quill scratching on parchment. "He is lucid," the Inquisitor said. His voice was processed, metallic, devoid of warmth. "Where?" I tried to speak, but my throat was like sandpaper. "Where is the ship?" The cruiser Bastion of Martyrs was recovered, drifting in the halo stars. The Inquisitor replied, "You are Navigator Valerius Thorn. You are the sole survivor of the bridge crew. In fact, of the 15,000 souls listed on the manifest, only 42 individuals were found alive. All of them are incoherent." "The captain?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Listed as KIA. We found the command throne fused into a solid lump of adamantium. There was no organic residue." I closed my eyes. "We escaped. We beat it." The Inquisitor paused. The silence stretched too long. "Navigator Thorn, what is the last date you remember?" "The year 945 M41, I rasped. "We were 3 weeks out from Port Wander." The Inquisitor glanced at the servitor, then back to me. "It is currently the year 402 M42. The cicatrix maledictum has split the galaxy in half. Cadia, the world you were reinforcing, was destroyed nearly a century ago." I stared at the ceiling. 1,000 years? Or close enough to it. We hadn't just been adrift, we had been removed from the timeline entirely. The civilization we had fought to save was gone, replaced by this darker, broken era. "And the ship?" I asked, a sudden cold dread pooling in my stomach. "What will happen to the Bastion?" "She is a miracle," the Inquisitor said, and for the first time, there was a note of reverence in his voice. "Despite the damage, the hull integrity is 100%. The machine spirit is aggressive, yes, but incredibly potent. The Departamento Munitorum has already ordered her refit. The Indomitus Crusade needs every ship. She will fly again within the month." "No," I whispered. "No, you don't understand. She isn't right. She has been sanctified by 3 separate ecclesiarchy covens." The Inquisitor dismissed me, turning to leave. "You will be debriefed further once your vitals stabilize. Welcome home, Navigator." He walked out. The door slid shut with a hiss. I lay there in the silence. I should have been relieved. I was alive. I was back in the Emperor's light. But then I looked at the reflection in the polished steel of the medical tray next to my bed. My face was gaunt, scarred, aged, but it was my forehead that held my attention. The bandana had been removed. My third eye was closed, a slit of scar tissue. But as I watched, the skin rippled. I didn't open the eye, I didn't need to. I could feel the ship. The Bastion of Martyrs was docked nearby. I could feel its presence like a phantom limb, and I could hear it. It wasn't singing hymns of the machine god, it was whispering. It was the same whisper I had heard in the gray void. The sanctification rites hadn't cleansed it, they had just annoyed it. I thought back to the moment of the merge. The phantom ship, the rust and the rot had overlaid us. I thought we had pushed it away. I thought the explosion had severed the link. But what if I was wrong? The bastion that came out of the warp was pristine, too pristine. The Inquisitor said hull integrity 100%. That is impossible for a ship that has drifted for a millennium. Unless the ship repaired itself. Unless the ship is organic. I looked at my reflection again. The perfect Valerius from the vision flashed in my mind. The one who said, "I am the only thing that is real." A terrible thought bloomed in my mind, cold and sharp as a scalpel. What if the real Bastion of Martyrs, the one of steel and faith, was destroyed in the explosion? What if the ship that emerged into real space, the ship they are about to unleash on the Indomitus Crusade, is the other one? The reflection? The predator that wears the skin of a cruiser? And if the ship is the reflection, what does that make me? I smiled. I couldn't help it. It wasn't my smile. It was smooth, calm, and terrifyingly perfect. "The Emperor protects," I whispered to the empty room. From the void dock outside, through kilometers of vacuum and steel, the Bastion of Martyrs whispered back, "We are hungry.